People think of founders as people who jump off a cliff, blindfolded into shark-infested waters. You know that's not true, right?
No,
What you're doing is calculate. What you don't do is get paralyzed by risk, right? You realize risk is something you have to deal with, and you're actually going to be decisive in the face of risk.
Howdy, y'all. I'm Elizabeth Gore. Welcome to The Big Idea from Yahoo Finance, the show that navigates the world of small business and entrepreneurship. As the co-founder of the small business funding platform, Hello Alice, it has always been my mission to help ensure entrepreneurs have the tools they need to succeed. So let's cowboy up. Today, the big idea question is, can entrepreneurship be taught? This week, we will focus on aspiring entrepreneurs. Joining us today is Reza Satchu. Reza is a senior lecturer of business administration in the Entrepreneurship Management Unit at Harvard Business School. For over 20 years, Reza has been both a serial founder and entrepreneurship professor, co-founding, building, and managing 6 operating businesses that have collectively been sold for over $3.5 billion. Currently at Harvard, Professor Satchu teaches 3 courses: the Founder Mindset, and the Founder Launch, and the Entrepreneurial Manager. As someone who spends his days quite literally teaching entrepreneurship, there is no one better to answer today's big idea question. Let's welcome Professor Satchu. Howdy.
Hi, Elizabeth.
Welcome to The Big Idea. I'm so happy you're here.
Thank you for having me.
I feel honored
Well,
to
I
have
don't know about that.
Harvard in the room.
Wow, there you go.
So tell me, our big idea question today is, can entrepreneurship be taught?
Well, I sure hope so, because I've dedicated 25
like,
years of my life.
Oh,
Okay,
yeah,
it would be a lot of ways to tie it. So look, I've been a serial founder, someone who's built and exited a few businesses. And so the answer, I would say, is absolutely it can be taught. I really believe that strongly, and I believe I've seen it through my students, okay? So at a minimum, the way in which it can be taught is just opening people's eyes to what's possible, okay? So at a minimum, if nothing else, we can just share with people stories of people who started on a cattle ranch in Texas and say, look at what's possible, okay? So at a minimum, we can do that, but I actually think we can go much further than that. And so what I'd say that I try most to teach is judgment. So if I think about what a founder most needs, it is judgment, because you know this, you are constantly facing imperfect information. You constantly don't have enough resources. You constantly have imperfection around you, and yet you've got to make decisions.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely.
And so what I'm really trying to teach is judgment. And I believe judgment is not something you're born with. I believe it's something that can be taught.
I feel like every college should have entrepreneurship in it.
Absolutely. So I think, especially in the age of AI, where so many jobs are going to be replaced, the mode of learning has to change. So things like memorization or observation are irrelevant over the next set of years. What is most relevant is judgment, okay? So the reason entrepreneurship is so critically important, to your point, is because it forces students to stop being reactive or stop pretending they're the person to actually being the person making these decisions, okay, making these imperfect decisions. So what I say to my, there's a great book called The Coddling of the American Mind. We need to move to the opposite of that. So education at higher levels has been all about how do we make students as comfortable as possible. It should be the opposite.
Ooh.
It should absolutely be the opposite.
Let's get uncomfortable.
Yeah, correct.
How do we make them uncomfortable?
Well, so we do things like we force them to express their opinions, okay, in a transparent way. We force them to make decisions that are consequential without having all the information. Now, ultimately, it's safe because you're in a classroom, but it forces them to seek risk. Okay, one of the things I say, Elizabeth, to my students, I say, when I say the word risk, what do you think? And many of my students would say, I want to avoid it.
Interesting.
Okay, it's the opposite. You need
That's
to
all we
seek
do in
risk.
entrepreneurship.
Correct. Risk is where the return is. Now, you don't want to jump blindly into it.
Right. Calculated.
Calculated risk.
Yes.
Exactly. People think of founders as people who jump off a cliff, blindfolded into shark-infested waters. You know that's not true, right? What you're doing is calculate. What you don't do is get paralyzed by risk, right? You realize risk is something you have to deal with, and you're actually going to be decisive in the face of risk. So I try to create environments where there's real risk, where my students have to make decisions.
And of your students, I'm curious, what is a myth that you have to bust with them about entrepreneurship? So
I think there's so many, but I'll start with this one. That you need to have massive domain expertise in order to be an entrepreneur. Okay. So what I mean by that is that you need to know more about a particular industry than anyone else. And oftentimes where that goes is almost as measured by the number of years. Okay. Now, you and I know that if you look at just about every entrepreneur that you know, including I'm sure many that you have here, which
Absolutely.
is they would never have started that business if what they were thinking about was, do I know more than anyone else? Have I
Right.
had more years of experience? Okay. So take Jeff Bezos. I can promise you there were hundreds of people at Barnes & Noble whose only job was to think about how to sell more books. And here's Jeff, who maybe had read a few books, builds Amazon. Let's take Tesla. There were hundreds of thousands of people whose job at GM and Ford was to think about how to sell more cars. And here's Elon Musk, who completely reinvents the industry. Okay.
Right.
My point, so the myth I would say is that it's not about number of years of domain expertise. It's about the quality of the insight that you have.
Let's say I'm sitting there, I'm listening to this podcast,
Yes.
and what if I want to step into entrepreneurship? What's the 3 pieces of advice that you would give
Yeah.
this human who's about to make the leap?
Okay. So first of all, I would say it is an incredibly noble thing to want to be an entrepreneur. Okay. I think the world needs more entrepreneurs. I think entrepreneurship is a force for good. So I think deep down, when you have that feeling, know that it's a good feeling.
love
It's a
that.
good thing. Okay. And because you're creating jobs, you're creating positive change for the world. Okay. So that's the first thing. The second thing is, you know, when you have an idea, just about everyone is going to tell you it's not going to work. Okay. And so it's very frustrating when everyone's telling you it's not going to work. And so what I say is just take these small C commitments. Okay. We're not talking about you jumping off the cliff.
Right.
Just to make these small C sort of curiosity where you're going to stop the car, pick up the phone, knock on the door, and explore your idea and sort of incrementally start getting information before you fully commit. Okay. Having said that, the third piece of advice I would say is you must commit. At some point as a founder, you must commit. Because what happens when you commit is magic, okay? 2 ways. One is you learn what you're capable of.
True.
But 2, and you've probably seen this too, is the magic happens precisely because of the fear, the ambition in your eyes, others show up. Your first customer shows up. Your first investor shows up because they're looking at you in the arena,
Right.
fighting these dragons and being like, I want to bet
That's
on this
amazing.
person. Yeah, it is amazing.
What does it mean to commit? Can we break
Okay.
that down for a minute?
So I'll tell you what I do at Harvard. Okay. So what I insist, so
I think I've heard of that school, but go
okay,
ahead.
right. Okay. So look, we are making some, I think, important changes there. Okay. But nonetheless, one of them was example in my class. My class is probably the most popular class at Harvard Business School. And so what I say to students is you cannot take my class. It's called Founder Launch unless you commit and sign a piece of paper saying to me that you're not recruiting.
Ooh.
Okay, so that's like telling a Harvard student to cut off their right arm, literally. Okay, because all they want is options.
Right.
And I'm saying, I'm not interested. You cannot take my class unless you commit. And the reason I say that is because I know the single most important thing I can do to help them launch a business is for them to feel the weight of that commitment, to be fully committed. So what I mean by commitment is really cutting off your options, viewing commitment as a superpower and not as a sacrifice. Okay, it really is a superpower.
Absolutely.
It really
It's
is
hard.
It is hard. And you learn what you're capable of and the magic shows up. So I can't tell you the number of my students who commit and then 3 months later are launching a business with customers and capital. And, you know, yes, I think I play a role in helping them, but it's really around their commitment.
So I want to talk about we talked about myths earlier, but we talk about dirty unicorns on our
Yes.
show. We love talking about mistakes and failures.
I've had a few of those.
Yeah. Well, tell me though, how do you teach your students to embrace and utilize failure?
Okay. So this is a great question, Elizabeth, and you and I know how important that is because the difference between being a founder and just about any other job is you face failure all the time.
Every day.
All the time. You desperately want a customer, you don't close them. You desperately want an investor, you don't close them. Like your life is full of failure. As opposed to a normal job where you go in and 9 times out of 10, you're checking boxes and you get things done the way it's supposed to. Okay. So basically, as a founder, you're suddenly reframing your whole life to one where you've got to deal with failure on a daily basis.
Absolutely.
And you've got to reframe failure as a place where learning happens. So 2 things happen in failure.
Learning happens.
Yes.
Where learning happens.
Where learning happens, okay? And the biggest learning you get from failure, and you've seen this too, is you have a right to recover.
Ooh.
Okay? I
have not heard that yet.
So people massively underestimate their ability to recover. Okay.
Wow.
And so you get the benefit of the learning, but you also recover. And suddenly you realize when you would fail there, it wasn't so bad. It just wasn't so bad. And without failure, you're never going to get the elixir of like this magical business, right? And so you've almost got to logically say that part of the reason you get to go from the ordinary world to the extraordinary world on this hero's founder journey is because you actually embrace failure and others are scared of it. And it's precisely because you'll occasionally get beaten by a dragon, you'll get back up and you'll build something of significance. And so it's a critically important part of the journey, as you know.
The reason I love the way you said you have the right to recover
Yes.
is I don't think people realize who don't run their own business, the mental health challenges and the isolation and how hard it is.
Yes.
And every success and failure truly is on your shoulders.
Yes, correct.
So the right to recover, I just think that's a beautiful framing.
You do have the right to recover. When you go on the founder journey, you have the right to recover. You've earned the right.
Yeah.
You've earned that right by just even embarking on this journey.
Right.
Yeah.
Hold that thought. We will be right back with all of you on The Big Idea. Howdy, y'all. Welcome back to The Big Idea. I'm Elizabeth Gore, and we are here with Reza, learning about entrepreneurship. So you talked about how your students approach Sturdy Unicorns. What's yours?
Yeah. Okay. So you know as a founder that unfortunately we have many. So the first is I built a self-storage business. Okay. And it ended up being the largest self-storage business in Canada. And I blinked. Okay. I sold it too early. All right. And now we should have ridden out the crisis, and I got nervous and sold it too quickly. Now, the great thing as a founder is you can learn from mistakes like that, right? And so I then built what became the largest student housing business in Canada. We just sold it for $1.7 billion 6 months ago.
Congratulations.
But I will tell you, a year beforehand, we had an offer for $1.1 billion, and all of my advisors said, sell it. And I just thought to myself, I'm not going to make the same mistake that I made in self-storage. And so, again, you need, as a founder, to trust your judgment, to trust your instincts. And sometimes you've got a lot of conflicted advisors, right? Yeah. Who have different reasons for doing things. So that's the first thing, is trust your judgment, especially on important decisions like sale.
So you have a saying, the curse of optionality. Tell us about that.
Yeah. So I thought a lot about this. And so, of course, we are taught in school, and it's sort of human psychology, that having more options is a good thing, right? More options is valuable.
Absolutely.
Okay. Here's the problem with that strategy. And it's not just in founding. I would say it's also in people's dating lives and other places, where frankly what happens is you never actually commit to something because you're always worried about giving up options. And the problem with that approach is you don't actually find out what you're truly capable of. Because you're always sitting on the sidelines collecting gold stars or options, as opposed to jumping into the arena, cutting off those options, and really seeing what you're capable of. And so I see this most acutely at Harvard, where my students are petrified of commitment.
Wow.
Really petrified. Okay. And they're in an environment where they're looking left and right. They want to preserve options because they're concerned that if they commit, oh my God, what if I fail? So I may as well sit on the sidelines, take these consulting or banking jobs that sort of preserve, even though I desperately want to be a founder, that preserve these options. And the problem is they live a life where they never figure out what they're capable of because they don't commit. And that is the curse of optionality.
And they have to commit.
They have to commit.
And then pivoting, let's talk about that. Because I mean, I'm sure every generation says things are moving so fast, things are moving so fast. But I truly do think since the Industrial Revolution, I mean, this is the fastest.
Light speed, yeah.
So tell me about iteration and pivoting.
Yeah, okay. So this is very interesting. I think this is a great topic, and we spend a lot of time thinking about this with my students, okay? So I call it sort of hypothesis-driven entrepreneurship. You have a hypothesis. You need a hypothesis as an entrepreneur. Basically, there is something you see different in the world that is different than the way it exists today, product, service, whatever it may be. And you have a hypothesis, and you go and do typically a bunch of customer testing. And invariably, that hypothesis doesn't turn out to be exactly what you expect it to be, okay? Meaning you get data from customers, and it's different. So what I found with many of my students is they see that it's different, and they just say, oh, this doesn't work. I'm going right back to square one, okay? there's real information in the process that you've had, okay? So what I suggest is you may need to pivot or change. The bullseye's change, but the information that you have is actually quite valuable. And yes, maybe you got to go right to step 0, but oftentimes that information is valuable and you can change the bullseye to something else. Okay. And so I think this sort of constant iterating and testing. The other thing I would say is that what I find with a lot of my young founders is they want to sit behind a computer. And you and I know you got to go talk to customers.
Go talk to them.
Go talk to customers.
All the
go
time.
Get the data. Okay, especially early, but all the time, right? If you've got a problem, go test that value proposition with a customer, not with your co-founder, not with, with the actual customer. And so that is, I'd say that's a critically important thing. And, the other thing about, I have a sort of a counter view on people, I think, fail. There's this concept of fail fast. I think people fail too fast.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. So I would actually say persevere for so long as you can fail well, meaning the magic happens by actually staying committed. That doesn't mean that you don't change with additional information, but the idea that at the first sign of resistance, you give up is a crazy idea. It's precisely because you've got to break through those walls.
Oh, hello, Alice. My company would have died 10 times over.
I'm sure. And the gains exist because you were willing to break through those walls and persevere, right? So that's a key message, I think.
So our team, when we reached out to you, one of the reasons we were so excited is just actually the love of learning.
Yeah.
And I actually spoke at an event last night, and all very high growth founders, and I was pushing them on just something that I've recently challenged myself on, and it is continuing to actually set aside time to learn as a founder.
Yes.
And I just want to ask you, and a lot of people are like, well, I'm not going to see that directly in my profits. I'm not going to see da-da-da-da. And so what is your advice to folks that, they're working 200-hour weeks and trying to get their business going, but the value of continuing as a founder to keep learning?
Yeah. Okay. So I think this is critically important. And so I actually have a definition of learning, okay? And I think it speaks very well to founders, especially in the age of AI, where I think it's judgment that we're trying to train. So learning happens when you're making consequential decisions that you're accountable for, okay? So consequential decisions that you're accountable for. The reason these decisions are consequential is because there's real risk around the decisions. You've got imperfect information. You don't have enough resources. It's actually the founder life, okay? So the first thing I would say as a founder is I have this phrase, which is if in doubt, okay?
Okay.
That doesn't mean that you just make you see a bunch of information, you don't know what to do, and you just go left. What I'm suggesting is most people, when they don't know what to do, is they just do the status quo and pretend not to make a decision, right? It's like deer in headlights.
Right.
So the learning has to happen by actually making a conscious decision to stay the course.
Right.
Okay. And so you need to practice that judgment muscle. Now, what I'd say is critically important is that because these are high stakes decisions, there's you have to take care of your mental health. You can't be working 200 hours a week because you can't be making these consequential decisions effectively if you're doing that.
There's no way.
Right. It's just so there has to be a balance. And, one of the things I would say is that you need some level of stability in your life because the founder journey is quite unstable. So for me, it was my family.
Right.
Okay. It could be your friends. It could be your church. It could be something. But you need some rock in your life that is stable.
Absolutely.
So that you can withstand the volatility, which also provides you with the opportunity. So it's not all negative, right?
Absolutely.
It's you just need some, and whether that stability is reading a book, whether that's whatever it is, you do need some time in your life where it's calm, right? So that
I've
you
heard
can
of
go.
that.
Yeah, me too. I think it happened sometime last year.
What have you learned lately? I mean, you're the great professor, but I want to know a couple of things you've learned lately.
Yeah. So, it's interesting. I'll tell you a key learning for me. I always thought my life, I sort of viewed it as very linearly, which was, I was like, I didn't grow up with very much. It was quite unstable or uncertain. And so what I thought I wanted was control, which meant I needed money and power. And then I'd get that, and then I'd have a family. And then at some point later in my life, I'd hopefully have impact. Okay. I think one of the things these students have taught me is that it's like a circle, not a linear thing. Actually, being kind to people, having impact is part of who you want to be, earlier on in your life. And so I think that's something which the young generation is actually thinking hard about. And so for me, I think thinking about impact that is not so linear, but something that's very much part of your life and it giving you energy is incredibly important. I think the second thing that I've learned is, these from the students is the pace of iteration, right?
Oh,
It's just
yeah.
you can get data very quickly. And so I think part of me is just keeping up
Right.
with this, right?
Right,
Because the
right.
pace of change is so fast. And so I'm constantly surprised at how quickly they're getting data. That doesn't mean they're making the right decisions. I think there I can help them.
Absolutely.
But you're in a world now where you can actually get information far faster than, you and me used to knock on doors to get information.
Yes.
Right? Now they're tapping on some
my
keyboards.
Encyclopedia
Yeah,
Britannicas.
exactly. I remember that.
Absolutely.
Yes, the folded pages.
Yeah,
there.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
I thank you so much for sharing your wisdom today.
No, I
and
appreciate it.
I think you've made a very big impact.
No, I
and
hope
the
so.
circle
Thank
is going to
you.
keep
Thank
going.
you.
So
Well, thanks for having me.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
At the end of each episode, I like to give a shout out to a small business who's doing amazing work. Today, I'd like to shout out one of Reza's favorites, Oply. Co-created by one of Reza's former students, Lindsay Chrisman, Oply is an AI-powered home management platform that helps homeowners manage home maintenance by predicting needs, connecting with local service providers, and streamlining the entire process from diagnosis to booking to payment. Check them out at oply.app. Thank you to Reza for coming on the show, and thank all of you for joining us. We hope you've learned a lot. This has been The Big Idea from Yahoo Finance. Please make sure to scan the QR code below to follow Yahoo Finance podcasts, or check us out at The Big Idea wherever you get your podcasts. You can also come say howdy to me on any of my social channels at Elizabeth Gore USA. I'm Elizabeth Gore, and as my grandmother always said, hold your head up high and give them hell. See you next time.
This content was not intended to be financial advice and should not be used as a substitute for professional financial services.